T-minus 17 seconds and counting. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Go for main engine start. Main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Conversations Sheltered in Place. And the purpose of these conversations, as we've said every week, is to help folks navigate this current crisis and to get through it hopefully better, more unified, stronger than ever. And I'm really excited about today's episode. We've got Paul Kirchoff on today, and he's an amazing individual, and I think will provide a lot of really important, really helpful tips and tools and navigational skills as we get through this. So before I bring him on, though, I want to let everybody know something about Paul if you don't already. So I'll just cover a little bit of his bio. Paul is a serial entrepreneur, investor, humanitarian, and global adventurer. He is the founder and CEO of EPIX, and that's EPX, a new business social network, and it's based on pursuit of achievement, spirit of adventure, and the power of impact. He's also founder and CEO of Domino One, a crowdsourced problem-solving software company that accelerates the protection of nature, human rights, and peace, and transforms governments into active democracies and accelerates innovation for any business. Paul is the founder and CEO of D1 Labs, if that wasn't enough, which is a powerful new impact incubator and accelerator. With the onslaught of COVID-19, he started Operation Spirit Lift, and you can find that at spiritlift.world, to raise money to protect the elderly and the homeless, but also he helped co-found and lead America's medical testing industry coalition called Operation Stay Safe, and that's at operationstaysafe.org. And they're focused on restarting the American economy by providing comprehensive large-scale testing for American citizens and businesses alike. He was most recently the founder and CEO of SaleAmp, a 10-year-old Austin, Texas-based pay-for-performance digital marketing agency before successfully exiting the business. Paul has directed and sold a film, sold thousands of copies of a corporate thriller novel, and he is currently on the UN's board of directors for Blockchain for Impact and involved in a multinational effort to bring internet connectivity and banking to the poor. So with that, I'm really excited, as I'm sure everybody's excited after hearing that bio to say hi to Paul. So, hey, Paul, how's it going?
Good. Boy, I tell you what, I need to either slow it down. Every time, I've never heard somebody read that whole thing, and it makes me think of two things. You know, when you're an entrepreneur, they always say you're supposed to focus. And I don't know whether that's focus or I'm just hitting a lot of things at once. But, you know, sometimes when the heart compels you to go, you got to go, you know? So thank you for sharing all that.
You bet. It's great to see you. I hope everything's going well for you.
And that so far, so good. Yeah. So far, so good. It's been an interesting experience. You know, a lot of people that are on the move quite a bit, as you know, one of the companies has a lot of adventure to it. So when that came to a close because of travel restrictions and, you know, some of the responsibility, I think, to other people, people have called me and said, gosh, you know, how's your business doing? I knew you guys were taking a lot of really cool networking trips. And I said, I've never had so much fun being quiet and staying in one place and, you know, enjoying my homestead for once. So it's going well, but, you know, there's a lot of work to do to help the world out. So appreciate you asking.
So where should we start? We got a lot of potential ways to start this conversation. Why don't you tell me about EPIX and specifically, you know, how we can maintain a spirit of community even though we're physically separated?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, you know, before we even talk about that company that I started, which I'm happy to share, and thank you for being a member of it. You know, what's interesting is that I think people that know your background, which I could probably take the same amount of time to introduce you, and I have, you know, we have many people that are your peers in there. I mean, there's other astronauts that are epic spacewalkers and space shuttle, have space shuttle experience, but there's people swimming oceans and accomplished entrepreneurs and everybody. And so, you know, I think that when I originally started that, I think it's because there's something powerful about having common birds of a feather flock together and having common like-minded people to do something. But really, one of the most things I'm most proud about in that community is you have all these super achievers from around the world, but the number one currency in the group is not bragging. It's how can you help other people? And as a matter of fact, that core value of this group, which by the way, I did not come up with and say, hey guys, hey Ron, when you join this, I want you to know, you guys showed me the number one core value is help first and help often. Yeah. And I think that when I look at the community that we built, that you're part of too, it's been tremendous to see how many of us are running to the fire rather than sheltering in place only to shelter in place, right? I mean, even the function that you're doing here is helping get the word out on things that people can do. And if one person's motivated to help others, it's a home run, And so a lot of us have been very busy bringing our skills and our brain power and our network, to deliver a better world, especially for people that can't get it themselves or don't know how.
Cool. And tell folks, I'm in Boulder, Colorado right now. Just recently moved here. And can you tell everybody where you're at?
Well, right now I'm in Austin, Texas, where I'm based, but I've been spending most of my time in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is beautiful country right next to also a mountain town and next to the Grand Canyon. And one of the interesting things from my own experience with with the coronavirus is, on one hand, I was traveling internationally quite a bit, and I could tell that the world was catching cold. I actually had a friend that was helping China source materials because they knew that China was going to shut its factories down. They had to do the same thing. They had to shut down in order to have everybody stay at home. And so they called me and they said, hey, Paul, I know you've got a pretty powerful community. Can you help me help China find protective equipment? So I did a little bit, and then I kind of went on my way and felt like I was helping a friend. And then all of a sudden the rest of the world catches cold. I'm on the road internationally. And the reason I'm sharing this story is because, not everything has been peachy this whole time, even for me. So what happened is I was gone for 10 days. I came home. I had to tell my son, who I usually am not away from that long, that I couldn't see him, because during the whole process, my mom was getting a knee replacement surgery, and she's 79, and it was my job with my brother, but my job now to go take care of her. So here comes the virus that nobody can see. I have to say I can't see my son, which is brutal enough. And then I had to drive across the country to take care of her. And I was one of those people that was communicating with her outside of a facility because I couldn't go in until she finally got out, and It turned out well. But it's been an interesting time in the middle of all the other, enterprises of trying to help, trying to maintain your businesses, but also, help rescue people that need help.
Yeah. I mean, I know that this present time that we're in is a time like never before. There's never been a time where the entire world, literally every single person in the world, is undeniably affected in one way or the other by what's in effect an existential threat. And you can argue that there's lots of existential threats that the entire world and humanity has been facing, but I don't think it's ever been as undeniable as this one is. There's no denying that everybo's affected, and so that has been causing a lot of heartbreaking pain and tragedy for folks. Those that are affected in one way or the other, whether they're affected because they're infected or somebody they love or know is infected, or they're affected because of the what it's doing to them financially and economically, and what's doing to their businesses and their life's work and everything else. And so we the old cliche of we're all in this together is obviously not just a cliche. It's the reality of the world that we're in. We are literally all in this together. And so can you speak a little bit towards that? What kind of how can we use this present time of heartache and challenge as an opportunity to come together more unified?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, you bring up a lot of great points. And I think, the obvious downside of what has happened has been the pain and suffering of the people who have lost their lives, or people that have even been sick and come close to losing their lives. I mean, that is a devastating thing, to a family and an ecosystem, even if one person is lost. And I think that, it's very easy for folks that are isolated, especially I think including the elderly, that are isolated, no one's talking to them, and yet they have the death dashboard up on CNN 24 hours a day because that's their only source of information.
Right.
And quite frankly, even after my mom was recovered from a knee replacement surgery, where I knew that her immune system was focused there, I still went back and spent time with her, excessive amounts of time, simply because I was worried about the isolation factor. And so I think that on one hand, we're at risk of the physical ailments, but even more importantly, many folks are at risk of the mental and emotional ailments of being isolated. But I think that when you're an entrepreneur, especially, and you're built to problem solve, and you're built to perpetually, sometimes erroneously, be optimistic, you can't help but to see like the wonderment in what's going on. And I've talked to several of my most respected friends, and I feel the same way. I mean, I just to paint a picture, where I grew up next to the Grand Canyon, some of the most beautiful natural landscape on the planet. And I'm sitting there every morning. I would get in a SUV and I would drive 20 miles outside of town because I found this massive golden grass lake bed that's, of course, now ancient, surrounded by dormant volcanoes. And I'm looking at this 14,000 foot peak, and you cannot help but to be in wonderment at the mathematical impossibility of the invisible hand of the universe, God, or whatever, that has lightly dusted with some pain and surprise an entire species to get it to stop for a moment, right? And maybe a little bit while it recovers, while it gives you perspective. And then hopefully, if we can find, the way to move forward, which we can talk about in a little bit, it'll allow you to go on in a slightly different perspective. And so I think when you think about that, it's also one of the most amazing times to be alive. And I mean, in business and just in life. I mean, my son, by the way, another COVID catastrophe or not, is graduation. He's a senior, right? He's not walking across the stage. He's doing this totally different. The fact that you're doing you're like Jay Leno back in the day with all these interesting people, is, you would have never thought you'd be doing that. We'd have been doing something else along the way. So it's remarkable, the amount of innovation, the amount of positivity. And by the way, back to your original point, the amount of community of people reaching out to help each other is just absolutely phenomenal, and it's not the people that you would normally think are the ones that now normally selflessly give. Like you said, never before has the person next to you that you would have never said hello to been able to rescue you or harm you. And it just connects us as a species. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of community, we've got a lot of people joining and tuning in. So hi to everybody. Hope this message finds everybody safe and healthy and happy. And send us questions or comments. We'll see them, and we'll talk about it. Join the conversation. This is not an interview. This is a conversation, and everybody who's watching, you're part of this conversation. So jump in here and let us know. So let's talk about some of the COVID-19 projects that you're working on. Operation Stay Safe and Operation Spirit Lift. Where do you see that helping, and specifically what is it doing?
Well, I think I'll share that in one moment, but I want to give you some background behind that. And I think this is a message to anybody who has any capability whatsoever, which everybody does. So this is by nature a message to everybody. I learned what was possible, especially as entrepreneurs that have communities and have social networks and have resources. What's possible when a fire happens at a macro level and a very significant level. And I learned this several years ago when 2 hurricanes came rolling through the BVI's and the U.S. Virgin Islands and eventually Puerto Rico, right? The second one clipped Puerto Rico pretty hard. But long story short is there was enormous devastation when the first hurricane that had record winds came through and just reduced everything in the BVI's to sticks. And I have a lot of friends down there, and we couldn't get a hold of anybody. So what happened is a group of leaders of other entrepreneur networks, right? That I guess, and maybe in some days you would think were competitive. It didn't matter. We called each other. And long story short is in 48 hours, we self-organized a system and a capability to be the first responders to these islands. We flew down insulin for folks that would have died without it. We flew down boards in other people's Learjets. I'm not at that level to have a Learjet, nor do I really want one, but we have some friends that have them. So we are putting boards to help reinforce stuff. And I'm sitting in Austin, Texas, making calls of who gets on the plane to be saved before the second one comes in, not knowing anything other than age and a name. And it was really an amazing thing. But long story short is we were the responders before any military, before any Red Cross, and we saved lots of lives. So when this thing came about, it was very, very easy to understand what's possible. And we'll skip the spirit lift thing, because that was really a way to crowdsource and to help the elderly and the poor with some hand sanitizer and things that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get easily themselves. But the big one was just like the hurricanes. There's another gentleman that many of the folks that are tuning in here knows well, a very good friend of mine, John Souza, who's also in Epics. And we had a conversation about 7 weeks ago about what is going to get the economy going again, right? What is going to protect people and get the economy again? And of course, the easy answer was testing, but the question was, how do you do it on a scale that can wrap its arms around Los Angeles, right? And then Phoenix, and then Austin, Texas, let alone the country. And we were watching Abbott Labs and a lot of these very incredible businesses launching their first attempts at helping to solve it. And we just realized that, wow, that's just one piece of what's needed. I mean, what's needed is the labs to process it, that we're going to run into bottlenecks, the amount of test kits. Was that science even good or not, right? So many things had to come together to really put in place something. And then, of course, what we kind of had a hypothesis of, which has come true, is, you can't just get tested once, right? You have to test and retest and make sure that if there are precautions that you take if you're positive, but then the telehealth, folks have a spot here. So we saw this big problem coming. And by the time we got into an intellectual discussion about it, we realized that the only answer is actually to rally the entire industry, all the players, even ones that compete with each other, into one big conglomerate to come put its arms around the nation, right? And I'm just talking about the United States right now, which is a big enough challenge, but this can be replicated. And so what we did is, much like the day that we decided to do something about the hurricanes that were putting lives at risk, we just decided to do it. I mean, without regard to political, the last thing we give a shit about, pardon my French on this thing, is politics. We don't care who's in the White House, who's in the Senate, who's complaining about who. Entrepreneurs don't care. We solve problems. And so we literally started picking up the phone and educating ourselves and talking to other CEOs. And they all agreed that this is the one time, much like a war, that we would come together and we would put our collective capacity together. Now, one of the interesting things is we had to come up with how do you organize this group, right? I mean, these people have businesses, and we came up with this concept called the open business architecture, which is kind of like an amoeba. The amoeba may change shapes, but as it consumes something, it grows in its horsepower and becomes something new. And we just basically said, if you believe that widespread testing for businesses or the citizens is important, and you have some capacity and a business that can help, join in here. And when we bring this entire capacity to a city or to a big business like an airline or whatever, we'll call you and you execute your business model here. And everybody's been we just have the charter members, but we're up to like 22 or 23 businesses that are leaders in all these spaces. And in our conversations with businesses and our conversations with government, everybody has a piece to contribute. And we made a decision that, much like in the defense world, you have systems integrators that go there and scope the project and then bring the pieces. That's exactly what we're doing. Yeah. And so when we do this for a business or for a city or for a state or whatnot, it is inclusive of all types of tests, right? As long as they have a certain specificity and accuracy. We don't care whether people want to stick something in their nose, spit or get blood drawn. And we have the resources to set up entire soccer fields and test a zip code in an afternoon. I mean, the scale is what's missing in this world. So that's what we've been focused on. And we're right now, bringing this thing to market, and it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. And so basically what I'm hearing is that this crisis is compelling folks to engage in profound collaboration and true collaboration. And, true collaboration, I think, is where we look at the world not as an arena for self-interested competition, but rather we look at society as a as an organic whole, right? And so collaboration from that point of view, which is the point of view that you're describing, leads to diverse organizations working together systematically toward the benefit of the entire social body. And I think that's what true collaboration is all about. And Mark Sturdivant asked a question: is it possible to shift to a more collaborative business environment from a competitive one? Do we really need to be number one? Hello from White Mountains, Arizona.
Arizona. Yeah, well, first of all, that's great. I'm happy to meet another person from Arizona. I mean, I suppose you're asking me to take a stab at that answer.
We'll both do it. But
I mean, it's really tricky. I think that, perhaps one of the opportunities here is that the benchmark of what success means can be shifted, because for so long, Wall Street and resources and assets that you control and the things that you have been the benchmark from when you're a little boy or a little girl, that's what it means to be successful. And, nobody has really figured out how to make like happiness the ultimate, success metric, which is, by the way, in my life is much more powerful than any amount of money or anything. But, I think that, entire ecosystems are built to compete. And the question is, what's the measurement of success that says you're winning? But I do believe that, maybe co-opetition is a half step towards what we're experiencing now. But one thing that I do think is interesting, and of course I am happy to say I'm not old enough to have been around during any major wars as an adult. The reality, though, is that this is when there is an enemy that is greater than anybody within a industry. I think we're finding zero friction for the competitors to rally to do good. And one last thing I'll say back to Mark's comment is, and I said this long before any of this stuff happened, because I do so much stuff and have two businesses, quite frankly, that are tech based in social impact. Social impact was already on its way from like something that you do that's kind of whenever you have extra money to something that is fashionable, right? Like for example, I'm not a single guy, but if I was and I went and talked to a girl and I had a choice to say, I'm on a board of directors helping to save 18 humpback whales versus I have a Ferrari, the humpback whales would probably get me the date, So it was already going from optional to fashionable. But I think right now, every single business on the planet is having to answer, what are you doing to the ecosystem around you, right? What's your supply chain like? Are you using green energy, whatever it may be? So it's a perfect opportunity for a transformation of business and competition anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think, the argument that I hear about against a higher level of collaboration is that, competitiveness is written into our DNA. And I don't know if that's true or not, but what I do know is that is definitely true is cooperation is written into our DNA. That's why we're here. That's why we're the rulers of the world. Our ability to cooperate on a massive scale is how we went and evolved to become the major impact on the planet for good or for bad. But I also think that there's a difference between competition that leads to better goods and services and destructive competition that leads to a lack of services and monopolies and everything else. And so you can only have the good type of competition if you have a level playing field. If people aren't allowed to lie, cheat, and steal, and if we're not dealing with facts, right? If we're dealing with a lot of the things that somehow our society has enabled people to do and to get richer and richer in doing it, I think is a major problem, because that's not the type of competition that benefits the overall social body. That's the type of competition that benefits a couple of people. And I think that's the type of competition we need to get away from. And it is going to be a combination of the right type of competition and cooperation and profound collaboration. And yes, we have a common enemy now. And having been in combat, and actually my new book that's coming out talks a lot about the unifying effects of the crucible of combat and how that people who are willing to lay their life down for somebody else. Very, very strong bonds create in that type of environment. And every single person on the planet right now is in that type of environment, which has a lot of parallels to spaceflight, right? In spaceflight, we are isolated in a hostile environment. And right now, a vast majority of the people on the planet are isolated in a hostile environment. It's a hostile environment if you walk out the door right now and you don't have the right spacesuit on.
Yeah, it's true. What's interesting is, for those people that don't know much about my background or these endeavors that you mentioned, that's actually one of the reasons why I started that software company, Domino One, which crowdsources problem solving, is because 3 years ago, I had felt like the average person on the planet felt like their vote didn't matter in democracies, like their consumption patterns didn't matter to affecting the planet, and for sure that their ideas didn't matter. And it was just the separation of where the money is from where the people that, have a say. And yet, one of the most interesting things, back to this has to do with competition, is if the crowd ever comes together, if they ever know collectively what it is that is good for the group together, I mean, all the power in the world is in the group, right? We have the consumer dollars to stop a business. We have the tax dollars to stop a government. We have the votes to stop a politician that's run amok. But one of the tragedies, and maybe not for long, is the fact that the crowd is never together to harness its own decision making together. And so we'll see whether my software or somebody else's is a linchpin for that. But the reason I'm saying that as it relates to competition is because there's no anchor, there's no counterbalance to the level of competition between two parties that have the right connections that will go, harness 100 million sharks and take their fins. What is the counterbalance if what you said is information is not available to people, that their shark fin in your Maybelline makeup, not that Maybelline is doing that, I'm just saying, or that the crowd, decides to stop it. Yeah. And I think that one thing that this COVID crisis has done is it started to wake up the world at the base level that, no one's going to save this for us. You're seeing the gaps in leadership across the board in every aspect of government, for sure. And it's an opportunity for the crowd to gather its own senses and control its own destiny. But we're not quite there yet, but it's an opportunity. It's here right now.
I mean, each and every one of us is vastly more powerful than we imagine, than we realize. And that power and that strength, when we combine it together, is unstoppable. The issue goes back to what we were talking about with competition, that destructive competition, that unhealthy competition, because the crowd is so powerful. But if the crowd is being fed false information and basically being led astray, then forces that are counter to progress and to a greater level of equity and a greater level of harmony, those forces can basically lead those groups astray. And that's an example of what I was talking about when I was talking about destructive competition and how we need to do everything we can to level that playing field.
Yeah, I think although I will tell you that I think it's starting to happen, and it's starting to happen from the work that you and the squad at Fifth Element's doing, that I'm doing with Domino One and all these other things. Because I got to tell you, like 5 years ago, I went and spoke at an entrepreneur conference in I think it was Oslo, and out of like 30 young entrepreneurs, 29 of them had at either a business that was focused on impact or a business that its number 3 positioning thing was on impact. And I just remember that moment going like, wow, this is really cool. Like, this is the future of our businesses that are, putting impact first. But back to what I was going to say about impact is that, there's a little bit of work that I'm doing. And I just wanted to tell you that if you look at the amount of investment dollars that are impact centric, it is going up and to the right. The number of funds that are impact centric is going up and to the right. And I'm not talking about nonprofits necessarily. I'm talking about for-profit businesses that also have a triple bottom line contribution. That stuff is going to the right. And another thing I want to share is that there was a recent research survey done of like 100 of the top CEOs, and impact was number 3 on their list. Like, what does it mean to say this to our supply chain, to our employees, to our customers? So, even though I'm sitting here with a pretty hardcore piece of software that can get the crowd together to solve saving rainforests or to save narwhals in the North Norwegian Sea or whatever needs to be solved, that's an important piece of software. But the reality is the move is already happening. And all of these things that are lined up are telling me that consumers and the rest, and now even maybe the finance world, is starting to want to know the answer to what you're doing to the world. And before that, 10 years ago and before, nobody cared, right? Nobody really thought about it other than people that wanted to donate something to do good. So
yeah, I've seen that same trend, and it's very encouraging. But it's also a double-edged sword too, because it's becoming so fashionable. Just like the environmental movement was so fashionable back, 10 years ago or so, and we had all this greenwashing, right? Now we're having impact washing.
Yeah, true.
Big companies are masking what they're actually doing in an effort to appear to be really creating positive impact. And so, again, it goes back to information and the availability of information and the availability of real data-driven, evidence-based information.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the D1 Labs thing. I know you interviewed the business partner of mine, which is one of the pioneers of Earth Day. Alan's just phenomenal. But we started this impact incubator and accelerator, and the level and the sophistication of the members that we have are really, really amazing. These are pretty accomplished entrepreneurs doing some really cool stuff. But one of them, you'll be happy to know, is an information rating function with technology on a company's ability to prove that it is contributing to these SDGs. It's the missing piece is one of the ones that we're helping out. So I'm excited about that one.
SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
That's right. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So it's all coming. I feel like the world is rotating in the right direction, and it's just a very, very difficult speed bump to get over to, but it, like I said, they always say, the world is dark just before the dawn, right? Or whatever that saying is. Yeah.
So let's talk about the dawn then. Let's talk about how, or at least the economic dawn. What is it going to take to get us back on track financially and have the financial hardship? Because the people who are being hit the hardest are going to be the poor, especially the poor in developing countries, that were in bad shape to begin with. And so, we're talking about washing your hands as a major mitigation towards the spreading of the virus. But, millions or billions of people in the world don't have access to things like soap, or clean water. So, so how do you see us getting through this and coming out the other side?
Well, I personally think that there's several aspects to it. On one hand, from an economy standpoint, to me, it comes down to confidence. Do I have the confidence when I walk out the door, let alone with a family member, which you're normally willing to lay down your life for? It's even sometimes more important. Are you confident that where you're going and what you're doing is going to be safe? Back to Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. Safety and security is like one of the big ones, right? So if that's compromised, everything else can wait, and that's exactly what's happening. And I think sometimes, when you look at some of the states, at least here in the US, that are opening up early, what you're finding is that whether or not people agree that they should open up early, they're doing it because they know the economic hardship could trump even the handful of people that get sick. But what's happening is, citizens themselves are just not going out, right? Why? It's because they don't have the confidence. And even worse, in some cases, you have people that that need a paycheck from an employer. The employer wants them in the office, and yet you're putting your employees in a situation where it's like, do they go for the check, not knowing whether the person's kids that is also one of their compadres at work is going to get them sick? It's a very difficult situation. So I think there's multiple aspects to what you asked, which we should actually talk separately. One of them is impoverished nations where the density of the population is like, you can't get 6 feet apart, right? Which is a real issue. And the other one is the economy itself. So I think for me, the economy, we'll just start here in the United States as an example. I think that, a lot of the pieces are there. The question is whether the scale and comprehensiveness, hence what we're doing with Operation Stay Safe, John and I, is that you have to be able to know and continue to know that the business that you work for is safe when you go there. And then once you know that, then consumers need to feel safe that wherever they go, and it's a big issue, because it's not just a test one time. It's a test and retest and authenticate whether somebody is coming in, which starts to get into privacy issues and all sorts of stuff. It's a very complicated situation, but at the end of the day, it's for sure confidence that you can go out the door, and there is no way around it other than testing and retesting, which is an expensive endeavor that somebody has to pick up, whether it's insurance companies or the government or whatever. It's going to be difficult, I think. But I think if you really think about it, maybe even for your family's sake up in Boulder, you know, the level of confidence that you're going to have going to sit in a movie theater and watch a movie goes way up if you know that that entire business has a testing regimen in addition to all the PPE and spatial stuff, and that you know that people can't even get in there unless they've proven that they're safe, right? That is the answer to like just get back to quote unquote normal, even though a lot of us don't really want to go back to normal. But I think I got to tell you, like even in Arizona, you know, where I'm from, you know, we have the Navajo Nation, right next to where I grew up. And many of them are friends of mine that are on the reservation, and they've got 27,000 square miles and 300,000 Native Americans that are Navajo or Hopi on there. And many of them don't have running water. And so the question is, you know, if you don't take care of these populations that either don't have access to these resources or are mobile, you know, like in homeless for some cases, then you'll never control this thing. So, you know, whatever happens, that those populations have to be given special attention. And yeah, in some cases they have to. I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen the news, but in some cases, some of the Native American nations, not necessarily the Navajos, although they were doing it too, but even Cherokees and some other ones. I mean, they didn't care about the state orders. They basically set up their own checkpoints to say, guys, like, you don't understand. We have people that don't have running water. If you come in here, you know, you're going to sacrifice my entire population, which I understand and honor. So I think that, you know, no matter what, it's the same thing. I think around the board on the developed nations. It's comprehensive testing that doesn't go away. It's contact tracing when stuff happens, so you can squash it quick. It's the processing and distribution of information so that people know exactly what to do when they have been exposed to something, and the authorities know what to do to help take precautions where information may not be perfect. And it's a very tricky thing because the level of on the fence of civil liberties is definitely going to get tested. But on the other hand, if you don't, you know, it's a very tricky thing if you don't do enough. And that's really the conundrum that I think all our people are in. But for the other nations, you know, where you have billions of people that are in highly dense situations, you know, that's a very, very difficult one to contain. But even that has to be contained and given special consideration and investment, I think.
Yeah, it is a tough problem because there's a lot of different levers, right? There's the, you know, the privacy lever and you know, civil liberties and everything else, and
yeah,
it's going to be a difficult course to navigate. But we have to navigate it successfully, or we won't get out the other side of it.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that people, you know, I never really hear people say or answer is you know, there's lots of issues here. You know, back to what you said, I think, you know, man, you know, how hard is it to find the truth of the situation in anything, you know, nowadays? I mean, even our TV stations are polarized with what they want you to hear, and it's all the same information, slightly tweaked, and depending on what you watch, you're going to think something else. It's a very difficult situation for the average consumer, I think. But I never hear people, you know, say to whatever degree, just like, let's just take this super, super simple for a second. If you had to choose between your privacy or the health of your family, you know, which one is more important to you, right? Because if you, knowing that this thing spreads like it's airborne or whatever, if you don't sacrifice a little bit of privacy, even if it's opt-in for the betterment of the community around you, then your health is going to be sacrificed. If you choose health and stay private, I mean, you know, whatever the balance is of those two things is you don't see people having to make that choice, right? So,
but a problem with that, a lot of people see that as a false choice. A lot of people, and I don't know if it's a lot of people or it's just people with the loudest voice. They're the people you see on the news don't believe that it's a choice. That they want their privacy and they don't think there is a threat against their health or the health of their family.
And back to your original point about information, that's what makes it difficult because, you know, in the early days, you know, when you were starting this and I'm talking to John about getting the industry coalition together, the fatality rate that was being calculated for this virus was like 5%, and those of us that paid attention just barely, by the way, in math, we're sitting there thinking like, yeah, but it's a function of how many people you've tested. I mean, if you test a greater population, that death rate may go down, and all of a sudden it looks like the flu. So, what's the big deal? Like, we'll get sick, and and just like the flu, some people will perish. I didn't really think that, but the point is that I could see how people would look at that and say the odds. It's a mathematical calculation. I don't think that I'm going to get it, or I don't think I'm going to get it, and it's going to be that bad. So therefore, don't touch my privacy, right? I'll take the risk. And in some countries, like in the United States, I mean, some of those are like hardcore civil rights that you have, but yet we're in a difficult situation because your decision, Ron, affects my family, right? As does the people that don't have any information, like the homeless or the poor. So
because of how contagious this particular virus is,
right? Which is why it's our responsibility as leaders and as people who can muster resources, whether you have them or not, to protect everybody. Right? Everybody. So the one way that I don't have to worry about my civil liberties or anything is to invest and give my time and do whatever is possible to contribute to the protection of all. Right. Because this is one of those things where one escape pod, and we're back to,
exactly,
back to eating chimichangas here, for the 95th time, or whatever.
Is that what
tired of this stuff, man. COVID-19 has a totally different thing. It's 19 pounds. Anyway.
Okay, so we Daniel Yant, I thought Dr. Sanjay Gupta had it coined spot on. COVID-19 is a real attack of the zombies. It's a non-living pack of DNA and fatty cells. Yeah,
could be. I mean, could be. It kind of is like that. I mean, I think back to the wonderment of this whole situation is like, how did nature produce something that is hard to detect, pauses the entire species, and just long enough for us to get a different perspective. I mean, one of the interesting things I had a conversation of was the how long they always say it takes, like 21 days or whatever to develop a new habit. I mean, I know there's a lot of discussion about going back to normal or whatever, but the truth is these habits are way past 21 days, right? We're going to be at 63 days here in a little bit, and some of this stuff is not ever going to go back to what it was, but some of it's good that it doesn't. I mean, I can't imagine that the population of Kathmandu, for example, is not sitting there going like, wow, this is really tough. It's tough to be isolated, and we got a lot of sickness around, but holy cow, like I see the tip of Everest that I've never seen in my 60 years of living here, right? I mean, there's some really amazing things that it's just hard for me. And to some degree, it's tough to battle a little bit of sadness. I think even when you're a humanitarian or whatever words, philanthropist you want to use, it's tough to battle a little bit of sadness because you're seeing, of course, the devastation that's happening to families, which we kind of opened with, which is brutal enough. But then you're looking at the world and how nature is reclaiming some spots and thriving. Yeah, there's species that are coming out of the woodworks that people haven't seen, and all of a sudden it's like, man, that the clock is ticking if we don't keep it, some of this a certain way. So I'm hoping that the good stuff that is happening to the world and to our souls and our perspectives and everything will stick a lot longer. But
I guess the really harsh way to look at this is that we're being attacked by the planet's antibodies, that we're the virus on the planet.
No doubt about it.
Damage to our living ecosystem, and so I mean that's one way to look at it. I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's true. I think people have for all the great things we do, we cause quite a bit of damage when unchecked, which is part of the challenge. Is like the checks and balances of greed and acquiring things at the expense of the population and at the expense of nature, even greater in some cases. Maybe this is that opportunity where balance is restored a little bit, because it has to be. Otherwise, we're certainly not headed for a great. I mean, listen, people can argue. I'm happy to argue with good friends of mine to say like on everything related from global warming to whatever, but at the end of the day, when you're having species, fall away and the level of oxygen in the world is going down and habitats are being destroyed. I mean, one of our other projects in D1 Labs, the social impact incubator, is an amazing film called The Last Place on Earth, and it's in Sumatra. It's a documentary, and it's the last place where you have natural habitat of orangutans, tigers, rhinos, and elephants in one spot. They used to be everywhere together. This is it. Like, this is the last place on Earth that will happen. And so, when you see some of that stuff happening, it's hard to argue that we're not on some path. I mean, maybe the declination of the curve is not as deep as some people think, doomsday sayers on climate change or whatever, but who cares? At the end of the day, when I see people ripping, like I said, hundreds of millions of shark fins out with no regard to anything, the ecosystem underwater, I mean, these are things that, they're not unaffected, and so that's one of the challenges here. Yeah.
Definitely. So that brings up a lot of thoughts, at least in me, in that, it hit me from day one that this is a wake up call and a call to action, to not go back to the upside down status quo that we had before. We're in a period of we talk about the Great Depression that might come, but right now we're in the Great Transition, I think. Yeah. And I think we have a lot of opportunity. And I think, the I don't know what the fatality rate is of the virus, but I think it's relatively low. But could you imagine if it was 90%? If we had a virus that was this contagious with a 90% fatality rate, or even a fatality rate like Ebola or MERS or something like that, a very, very high fatality rate. So one of the things that this crisis is compelling us to do is to get our act together on infectious disease control, to put systems in place and to basically put the infrastructure in to be able to deal with these things that are undoubtedly going to come down the pike again, and they could be much worse than this one. So there is a tremendous benefit that could come from this, if for nothing else, just our ability as a species to prepare for the next crisis.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And, I mean, I've had this conversation with people too, which is how lucky are we that that this particular virus, it has caused potentially a very low amount of pain on our species, even though it feels like, I mean, you could never explain that to somebody who's lost their family member or their friends, which I have lost some friends during this crisis too. But at the end of the day, when you look at it at a species level, it's like, wow, how fortunate are we that we even have the chance to prepare for and to understand where these gaps are, to prepare ourselves, because it could be way worse. And which brings me back to those civil liberty conversations, which is like, well, it's easy to say that when, only a handful of people are being affected next to you. What if 50% of everybody around you, and you're putting plastic up on the outside of your house, right? That's a whole nother level of pain. You'd probably be willing to do whatever it takes. So it is a wake up call and a warm up session for what is sure to be something worse coming at some point. Man made or not, by the way.
Yeah, and I think whenever you're getting into the territory where civil liberties and privacy is being threatened, I think the most important tool to navigate that is truth data. It's real, evidence-based, peer-reviewed truth data, because if not, then we start leading down a path towards George Orwell's world in 1984, in his book 1984, right? Where who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the scary scenario, where we have a forcing function like a virus that degrades civil liberty, that we don't have a choice. We have to react in a way that potentially degrades civil liberties and privacy. And then you couple that with a post-truth world where the people in power, who for the most part are in power because it's an unlevel playing field, and the deck is stacked, and have risen to power, control the narrative that people are hearing, and that's a scary scenario. And unfortunately, that's the scenario that we're currently in. That's proven out. And so, I think one of the things that hopefully this crisis will lead us to is a greater embracement of real data, scientific data, the scientific process, evidence-based policies and procedures and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw a quick comment that Daniel put in here, about martial law and short-term truncation of rights. I mean, the tricky thing, back to really the damage that, unabated greed can do to the environment and to civil liberties and everything else is I think that's one thing that's missing. It's like the will of the people, if you really think about it, right? Because in many cases, it's somebody that is making the decision on your welfare or my welfare. And again, that's what leaders should do. But because of these other aspects of leadership that are, sometimes separated from the will of the people, those things are not always, done in the right fashion. And that puts what's best for the people. And that's what's tricky, because like I personally, believe in the preservation of civil liberties, and also, the rights that you should have as a human on everything. But I also have this like little but element, which is what happens when the entire population is at stake, right? And should you be willing to, Daniel said, truncate some of this in order to protect the entire population, which includes you and your loved ones too? And I think the answer is yes, but the question is it the crowd and the community that's making that decision together is a very different thing than somebody putting an order in for martial law and surrounding your family and violating that for you. And I think that's that careful line that, is a real conundrum for the world.
Again, the crowd can, and I believe in the inherent goodness and the inherent wisdom of individual people. And I think collectively we have a lot of wisdom. Where we run into problems is when that same crowd is misinformed and fed the wrong information that's not true, that's false. That's where that whole idea falls apart. That's where the stack of cards comes tumbling down, and that's what we need to get our hands around, and we need to rectify, is how easy it is for people to put out false information and lead people astray.
Yeah, true. But I would say this. I mean, one of the other very positive, elements here that has been a surprise in a positive way has been, look at what the general population has done, right? And I'm talking about in places where either, like the restoration of civil liberties, right, to go out and do things. And people have made their own decisions, somewhat collectively, but even individually as a collection, to pace their own reentry into the world. And that is actually, that has been a very pleasant surprise, because, that means that people are making their own judgments. Because like I said, depending on where you get your news or information, whether it's from one channel or the other, or even from Facebook, you have to, at the end of the day, I think the large majority of people, at least here in the States, understand that like it's coming from an opinionated source at all times, and you have to make your own decision of what you feel comfortable with, which gets back to this Operation Stay Safe thing. If you want to remove all of that off the table, right, regardless of whether somebody thinks that there's a risk or not, just take care of everybody and keep everybody safe and keep everybody authenticated, right, in a non-violating personal liberty way, and then nobody has anything to worry about it. But that's a very, you got to have the resources we put together to make that happen.
Yeah.
So it's important.
Staysource.org.
Stay safe.
Staysafe.org.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the close. So Paul, is there any advice or tips that you can give folks to help them navigate this? Is there any insight that you can share with how you think the post COVID-19 world is going to look and how we're going to get there?
Well, it's tough to undo some of the inefficiencies that we've had for many years, but I really hold out enormous hope for the positive things that are happening. To some degree, you've had people their whole lives that when they walk out the door, they're sitting on a couch next to somebody they love, their face is in their phone 24 hours a day, right? And through this isolation, they've had to reach out to other people with things like, teleconference calls or whatever, I mean, video calls or whatever. So I feel like there's some great things that are happening that are actually bringing us closer together rather than keeping us isolated. It's kind of weird how through isolation, we're actually closer together. You would never really think that. Yeah. But I think I would leave it at that. And the fact that, social impact and being selfless and proving in your business that you are doing something positive for the world is here to stay. And it's getting an exclamation mark next to it because of where the world was already headed. And this thing just put it right on the map. And any business that does not have a statement with proof, coming soon, to show what they're doing to keep the world neutral, at least, if not positive, is going to have a hard time earning dollars, I think, in the future. And that's a really positive thing for the world. Super.
Well, thanks, Paul. It's great seeing you. It's been a while. We were supposed to be in Costa Rica a month or two ago back in April at the Rainforest Summit. That got canceled. So.
Yeah, it's all right though. It's all right, man. We're here now, and want to say a quick thank you to all of our pals and some of my friends that joined us and great comments. But I'm happy to do this whenever. And thanks for having me, man. It's funny. When I started Epics, it was always me interviewing like Olympians and astronauts and stuff. And so I told my son, I'm like, man, I must have really hit the jackpot because I got an astronaut, talking to me now on this.
This is not interviewing you.
I know.
We're having a conversation, and I'm really excited. We've got some great fellow conversers coming up in the next couple of weeks. Stay tuned for that. I'll be posting notes about that, about who's going to be on the show, but I'm really excited. And this is all about getting us through this stronger, more unified than ever. And we are going to get through this. And so, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for sharing all the great information. Thank you for what you're doing to help us all get through this and to get us back to some semblance of productivity and to get us back to hopefully to the point where we could spend time together physically. So,
yeah, for sure, man.
All right. Well, see everybody next week. And thanks for joining in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for your questions. And in the comments, if you got suggestions for other people to bring on this, just let me know and we'll reach out to them. So thanks and see you next week. See ya.